So our presenters all ready to go? Give me a thumbs up. You're ready? Okay. So thanks everyone for coming today to session 6B. Pretty amazing. This is the last day of RDAP and we have still a lot of good things going on. So thank you for coming to this teaching session today. A little bit of logistics. This is a Zoom webinar, so attendees have been muted and your cameras are turned off. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A and please indicate for whom your question should be directed to. So you can just put the name of the presenter there, and so we know. You can move between the, oh, sorry, something else. This is going to run from 12:45 to about 1:45. And we're going to take the last 15 minutes for questions. So we have time to answer the Q&A. And then this session will have 3 live presentations. There are no recorded lightning talks, and you will be able to ask questions at the end. Let's see, we are going to save all the questions to the end, so we will get to them. We do have a code of conduct. It's been posted into the chat, and the RDAP Summit organizers are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There is a code of conduct helper with us today, Tisha Mensch, who has just introduced herself in the chat. Hello, Tisha. Thank you for helping out today. If you notice something, you can contact Tisha directly through Whova if you need assistance, and that they will give you a code of conduct email where you can report the incident if needed. So as I said, we have 3 presentations. We have 5 presenters with us today. So the first one is Maggie Marchant, is going to present the talk, Teaching by Example, Evidence of Data Literacy, Competencies, and Practices in Top Economic Journals. That will be followed by Wei Zakarvo. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. It's going to be on the talk, Student Inclusion as Co-Creators and Develop a Data Quality Checking Guide. And then the last presentation has 3 presenters, Allison Kittering, Lenny Argabright, sorry, and Sam Zellick. And so we will go in those orders. So Maggie, if you want to start sharing your screen and kick us off. Thank you. And your presentation looks great.
Okay, good. It's always the question in Zoom. Okay, awesome. So I'm excited to share a little bit about my research today. Like Amy said, my name is Maggie Marchant. I'm a librarian at Brigham Young University, and I cover the areas of economics and finance and data. In this research, I'm looking into data literacy, so a little bit of background on what data literacy is and why I study it in the context of economics. So generally, data literacy involves being able to understand, find, interpret, manage, and use data. And this is in the context of being able to answer questions or make decisions and do research. So kind of the context of being able to use data within the whole life cycle that you might need to use and understand it. This has been kind of talked about for a little bit over 10 years, but within libraries and universities, it's still an emerging area for many people. They may, outside of kind of people who work with data a lot, may not really think about the concept of data literacy. But in the last few years, it's become increasingly important within economics and business specifically. More discussion about what data literacy looks like within those specific contexts, and the American Economics Association encourages more data sharing now and has kind of guidelines for that. But we're finding that data literacy is important, that students need that when they're going either to work in industry, in different fields, or onto higher education. But there's still not really a clear pathway for how students learn and develop these competencies. So they obviously will learn some of them in classes, but it's not clear that they are kind of being able to feel confident in their data literacy skills just through their classes. So I wanted to explore maybe ways that we might be able to support students in learning these skills, especially students who may have encounter more obstacles in having opportunities to learn them. So this is kind of just an illustration of kind of how I think of students developing data literacy and working with data. So this is kind of a little like wilderness, and there's not really a clear pathway. Maybe we want to get to like that ridge in the back, but there's like plants in the way. We have to like go up and down. So we want to kind of make a better path for students. And today I'm going to talk about two main research questions from this project. One is first just thinking about what data literacy competencies are important within economics specifically, because there might be some things that are more important in this area. So there's a couple ways we might approach this. One would be to ask economic researchers what they think, like through a survey or interviews. But since data literacy as a concept is not something that economists or economic professors and faculty are typically thinking about, I wanted to see more of what they're doing in practice. And one of the main outputs from economic research are peer-reviewed articles. So looking at what literacy competencies are coming through in the practice of this research. And then thinking about what competencies are important, then transferring that to students and how they're learning about these competencies. In economics, especially the upper level classes for undergraduates and graduates, one of the major ways that they are learning is through reading and studying and replicating peer-reviewed articles. And so thinking about that's kind of a form of textbook for these students in some of these higher level classes. Are they having the context that they need in these articles to understand how to replicate the study, how to find the data to replicate it, or to kind of do a similar study that based on similar research? So going into more of this research, the sample for this research comes from a top economics journals. So they were ranked by taking averages from Journal Citation Reports, Scimago, and Google Scholar kind of rankings on journals, and picking kind of the top 10. They were all focused on kind of general topics. There were some top journals that were on like agricultural economics, but I wanted to get more of a broad general picture. And there are also journals that focus on empirical research instead of theoretical or literature reviews, because we want to focus on how they're working with real world data. From each journal, we took 10 articles from 2021, which was the most recent year when we collected the data. And then we used the Adobe Acrobat Index search tool, which allows you to search for predefined terms within a large number of PDF documents. So that helps to kind of quickly and relatively accurately pull out those terms. So thinking about those data literacy competency terms, these were curated from a close reading of articles from those top journals that we had identified, and then also a review of literature on data literacy. So it's covering both the things that economists are actually using to talk about data, and then also additional terms that are important within data literacy that we maybe didn't see initially. One thing that we did exclude in this research is the analysis competency of data literacy, which is a major competency, but something that is well established within economics education and economics research. So I knew that this was going to be well covered within every article. And I wanted to focus on things that are a little bit less common, that students might not get through their education. So this is a table of the terms that we used to search in these articles. We identified 5 major competencies. So you see at the top, general is just, we just looked to see like how often did they talk about data or their sample, which was a lot in all these articles. But the 5 major competencies were describing data, evaluating data, using data, citing data, and sharing. And then we found specific terms that researchers use or may use to talk about these processes in their research. We also use the asterisks to truncate the terms to get different versions of the word, as you see here. So the results, these are ongoing, but what we found so far is that the competencies of describing, evaluating, and using are well represented in all of the articles that we looked at. These are kind of core processes for economic researchers and well documented. Sharing data was also quite common. 82 out of the 100 articles referenced sharing their data in some way. And then citing data was the weakest area. So 25 articles out of 100 included terms for citing their data. One thing that we have found is that the citing data, we hadn't looked in the references section of the articles because we were focused mainly on the core text of what they were saying. But often citations are coming in the references when they're citing their data. But we've started to look back into the references and still are not finding many articles that are clearly and consistently citing their data in a way that would be clear to a reader or a student. So to go dive a little bit deeper into the results, this is a graph with the proportion of articles that had these terms in the article. And so we can see that the common terms for describing data included the word describe, average, mean. Those are very common terms that we might think of to, like a data description section of an article. Less common terms were things like discrete, time series, nominal, longitudinal, and categorical. For evaluating data, common terms were things like compare, consistent, robust, and less common terms were things like caveat, noise, or IRB, which might be things that a researcher might consider but might not mention in their paper when they publish it. For using data, we found that terms like construct, obtain, restrict were the most common. Less common terms were things like download or clean. And then for sharing data, we found that the 2 most common terms were available and replicate. And so those are things like availability statements or replication data. And then the repositories, only a few articles mentioned putting their data in a repository, which may make it a little bit hard if they don't have a kind of a specific link to where their data is for someone to find it. So the implications of our findings so far, as a librarian, I wanted to focus on how libraries can support maybe these skills that are less represented in articles, both for teaching students and also maybe supporting researchers. So one of the main ways that we see here is that citing data is less common in these articles. And I think librarians are very well positioned to show the importance of citing data and also walk students through how to cite their data. And the ethical implications of that and understanding where the source is, who the creator is, and things like that. Additionally, we saw with sharing data that most articles were referencing sharing their data, but it can still be very difficult for students to actually find the data if they need to replicate a study or they're wanting to use that data for additional research. So I think that librarians can be well suited to help students understand the process of where to find and access data that might be shared in repositories that aren't mentioned, or how to contact researchers to get access to their data. Additionally, I think that librarians and economics faculty and instructors can partner to clarify some confusion that might happen for students as they transition from what they learn in the classroom to the practice of economics, either in their career or especially if they're planning to go on to additional graduate education. And we saw here in information about how data is described that the terms for types of data sets or variables like longitudinal data or categorical variables were less commonly used. And so these are terms that students learn in the classroom when they're initially learning about statistics and surveys, but they might not transfer into what's used in articles. So helping students to understand maybe what is used instead can be helpful. And then also we see a difference between common technical terms and preferred academic terms. So terms like noise and clean and download that we might use just in kind of regularly talking about working with data are not used in academic articles, which is not too surprising as they don't sound as maybe clear and professional as terms like robust, consistent, and construct that are used more often. But I think that teaching students how they can use these more academic terms and letting them practice can be helpful, especially if they're going on to do graduate work. So this work is ongoing, and future questions that I will be looking into are how do these experienced researchers learn these data literacy skills that are shown in their research? Past work has shown that there is a clear skills gap between graduate students and faculty, and even more so with undergraduate students. So specifically, what methods or activities can be used to most effectively build these skills
1 minute
within
left.
students? Thank you. And then also thinking about how does showing data literacy competencies improve the quality and usefulness of research, or does it improve that? And some initial findings there, we found that showing these competencies, particularly ones such as sharing data competency, does increase the number of citations for articles and the number of uses. So we're seeing some of this that it does maybe improve the reach of these articles. So just to close, to bring it back to the first picture of kind of the wilderness, you can see here there's a little bit more of a pathway. And so I hope with this research to continue to be able to understand how students are learning data literacy and where the gaps might be so that we can fill in. And thank you for listening. I look forward to more questions during the Q&A.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation, Maggie. And hopefully people will be putting their questions in the chat for you. Wei, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes. Amy, does it work?
I can see your slides. Now you're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your nice introduction. Again, my name is Wei Zakharov, Associate Professor, Engineering Information Specialist at the Purdue Libraries and School of Information Studies. My topic is student inclusion as co-creators to develop a data quality checking guide. So here's the agenda. We will talk about what data quality is, and then the background information, how this data quality checking guide is developed, and what it looks like, and also student, how they have been utilizing this checking guide for their data-related projects. So what data quality is, I listed several definitions on this slide. First, data that are fit for use by data consumers. Second, fitness for use. Third one, capability of data to satisfy stated and implied needs. And the last one is a bit longer, suitability and its properties for particular uses or use case. So in general, data quality, there is no like one data fits all, really driven by your data needs. So do data meet your data needs? And that's really how you really evaluate the data quality part. Next, I want to talk about the background information is how this data quality checking guide has been developed and utilized. I regularly teach two courses. The first one is Information and Library Science ILS 1.3, Introduction to Data Management. It's a 1 credit course. The next one is undergraduate research academic courses in College of Engineering at Purdue. And I'll also offer workshops and guest lectures on campus. So next, I will provide some details on the two courses I offer and which kind of like the big needs really driven by students why we have this quality guide created for them. ILS 1.3, Introduction to Data Management. History is before COVID, so faculty from libraries, philosophy and electrical and computer engineering, we proposed a grant and funded by Purdue Integrative Data Science Initiative Education Grant. And this one we proposed is to develop 3 1-credit course, meeting 3 key areas of data science, data literacy. So libraries, me and another colleague, Professor Sarah Huber, we developed the course on data organization and management. And then philosophy covering data ethics and ECE covering data analysis using Python. So this is the course flyer we offered for the first time in spring 2019. So at that time, the course was $295. It was a tentative course number. After successfully teaching this course for 2 times, library's curriculum committee approved the request. So now the course has a permanent course number, which is 103. And then since then, for the first couple years, I taught like once every academic year. And then in 2021 and 2022, the course became very popular. We start offering the course every semester. I also want to thank our next presentation speaker, Lini Albright. She was the guest speaker for my course like last semester. And the course also meets the requirements of the applications in data science certificate. And this certificate was also kind of like, it's also quite new, 2 to 3 years old. And then for students on campus who are interested in getting the certificate, there are a minimum of 16 credit hours required. So 10 hours, we call it like core courses, and then 6, we call that like application level. And there's 1 under core courses, which is a minimum of 1 credit hour in data ethics and digital citizenship. And this is a category 103 meets the requirements. And there are also multiple elective courses under this category, so students could choose. And then I have students for these several semesters from all STEM areas. I wish I could also have some students from humanities and social sciences. So the next course I regularly teach since 2020, and I teach this course every semester, is undergrad research academic courses in VIP, vertically integrated projects in the College of Engineering at Purdue. So typically undergrad students can take 2 credits every semester to work on faculty-led research projects. And then these students work in many times interdisciplinary fashion. We also call it vertically integrated projects, meaning we have students in a team ranging from first year up to senior students and with faculty. When I first started working with the VIP program in 2017, there were over 200 students. And now we have more than 600 undergrad students working in more than 50 course sections each year. So the program also grows very fast. This program also has VIP consortium. The program first started at Purdue, but has been expanded to 44 universities in 16 states. So they also have their annual VIP consortium meetings and conference. Related with this one is I also noticed there's a gap. So I'm currently developing LS 395 one credit course. And this course is understanding your research data. And okay, so I will be offering next spring semester will Purdue OUR, like a Purdue Office of Undergrad Research. And for that one, it will be for students, undergrad researchers who have current research project experience applying data lifecycle ethical management into their current research projects. So if anyone does research data management, support, education with undergrad researchers, please contact me. I would love to hear from you. So next, the essential issues in data quality management. So in my class, I have a purposefully constructed data practice sheet. And also students in the class talk about their data projects, their internship experience. And then in summary, real life data are always dirty, right? They are not consistent, always many duplicates, not accurate, not complete, sometimes outdated. And when you got several issues also interacted with each other, the data quality management could be even more challenging. Here is what the data quality checking guide, so after the several semesters, now what it looks like. And I also want to thank Midwest Data Librarian. So I presented back, I think, in 2019, also over there, is got lots of good feedback from Midwest data librarians at the symposium. And this data checking guide has 6 categories: data credibility, timeliness, information completeness, data accuracy, data consistency, and the data deduplication. So the first one, credibility, really focusing on who. So, and for this data checking guide, it's good for both data users and the data generators. So at first, I work with many undergrad students. They don't really create their own data. They use other people's data. And then when you want to use other people's data, you want to look for this information and see if the data is reusable, or you do need to look for other data. And for data generators, this one could be also used. It's, okay, now I want to publish my own data. And do I provide all the information in this checking guide? So for other people, my data could be reusable. For the data credibility, right? Do you have information on the data set? Is who created the data, who published, who contributed to the data? Is contact information available? And many times I also work with undergrad researchers. If they want to publish their data, they often don't think about giving credits to themselves. So that's one way is ensure data, credible, reusable. When other people have questions, they can contact you, but also you can give credits to yourself, the work you did. And then for timeliness, right, is for your own data needs. Is this data set, right, outdated? When captured, updated, is version control information available? Next one, information completeness, right? Missing elements, missing records, information captured for your intended uses, data described to be foundable and reusable for the data capturing thing. That's about the data validity. Next one, data accuracy, right? Are there data typos, data formats, are they correct? How about the outliers? Do data represent information you intend? Next one, data consistency. data formats consistency, data units, measurements consistency, types of data consistency, and also data syncness across platforms. The last one is data deduplication, right? Do you have repeated data records? Are they entered more than once? You might want to notice that. Next, I want to show you a couple examples is how students utilize this data quality checking guide. The first one, student teams, their research question, what are the impact of COVID vaccines on tendencies, new cases numbers? Are people of a particular age vulnerable to coronavirus disease? So that's what the groups are curious. And then they identified 2 data sources. Now, this is how they use the data quality checking guide to quickly analyze, right? Is the status of my data sources, credibility, timeliness, and obviously for this one, the government update the data every day, and information completeness, accuracy, consistency, data deduplication. So you can see it's like for this data sets, the quality is very high. The next example, research question. So these groups of students, they want to practice machine learning technique skills. So they found the data source, you can see, is from the UC Irvine Machine Learning Repository. And the question they want to answer is how different driving scenarios impact the driver's choice of accepting paper coupons by stores. So just give you an example is a driver, pass through, and then, for example, a restaurant give you paper coupons, are you likely to use it? They just want to see that. And here is how they utilize the checking guide for data credibility. They were able to find, who created data, who published, who contributed, is contact information available if I have questions, and timeliness, when it was created, do they have version control? In this case, it's just one time, and where it is. For information completeness, are there missing elements? They didn't notice, okay, missing elements. And then you might want to ask is, okay, how are missing data handled, right? Next question. Are there missing data records? They do notice is there are. Next, the data accuracy, right? Are there typos? Good thing is they don't. And then formats, data outliers. Did you notice that?
1 minute left.
Thank you. And then for data consistency, several questions. Typically, good thing is if you found a reputable data source, lots of the data quality checking guide questions, we do expect, it's not going to be big deal, but you do want to check. Last one I want to point out is students use a variety of data analysis tools. But one thing I always introduce them is for Open Refine, one very useful feature, cleaning messy big data is clustering function. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And then I just put one question for you to think about a recent related project, what could be very challenging or important for your data quality management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, A wonderful presentation. There was a request for the link to your guide. So if you don't mind to drop that in the chat, and I'll come back to it in the questions as well as a reminder. Okay, so now we have our last talk of the day of this session. So I'm not sure, Allison, Lenny, or Sam who's sharing the screen, but I turn it over to you and look forward to your talk.
All right, yeah, I can share. Grab it. Oh, for some reason it shared on the last slide. Oh wait, there we go.
It looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. So our talk is about responsible data and authorship training, expanding a graduate student program with the Research Integrity Office on our campus. And we are 3 librarians at UNC Wilmington: Lenny Argebright, the research data librarian, me, Allison Kittinger, the scholarly communications librarian, and Sam Zellick, the sciences librarian. And we're going to be talking about our collaboration, providing these trainings. And I will turn it over to Winnie.
Our talk today will briefly introduce what responsible conduct of research workshops are, which we'll refer to as RCR, and the new NIH policy update required for running RCR sessions. We'll describe how we in the library got involved in teaching these sessions and introduce an overview of what we included in our workshop. Finally, we'll reflect upon our experience teaching it for the first time. Yay! Many of you may already be participating in teaching RCR workshops, but we wanted to bring this to anyone who didn't know about last year's policy update or is interested in getting involved with their own research integrity office. And we'd love your feedback, as our second time teaching our RCR workshops will actually be this upcoming Tuesday. As defined by the NIH, responsible conduct of research is the practice of scientific investigation with integrity. It involves the awareness and application of established professional norms and ethical principles in the performance of all activities related to scientific research, end quote. The NIH policy about RCR describes guidance on the format, frequency, and timing of RCR instruction, as well as additional topics for consideration. The policy update you see here was released in February 2022, going into effect for grants beginning with September 25th, 2022 due dates. Essentially, what I want you to take away is that everything that is bolded are the new updates to be added as subject matter content that should be covered in RCR trainings. Some of what's bolded turned into collaboration with the Title IX office and the Environmental Health and Safety office at UNCW, but in regards to data and publishing, we'll cover these in our presentation. And here's a link to the full policy update. Sam got it. Thank you, Sam. So our Research Integrity Office is the group that regularly runs responsible conduct of research trainings every semester. Their approach has been to reinforce the information students learn in the CITI program Responsible Conduct of Research course, and to try to relate each topic specifically to how it is handled and what occurs at UNCW. They cover a few case studies based on the CITI program RCR vignettes to get students involved in the discussion. However, with the NIH's new policy updates, they no longer felt expert enough to cover the expanded topics with the appropriate depth. They had previously had only one PowerPoint slide to cover all of data and one slide to cover all of publishing. So as part of my efforts finding data partners on campus, I had developed still last slide.
Oh. Sorry.
I had developed a fairly frequent relationship with the IRB office, reviewing their ethical research management guidebook for researchers, being part of their IRB full review board, and involving them in my Love Data Week workshops. I felt like my efforts were paying off when they reached out to me asking if I could help them with RCR due to this new policy update. And after looking out over the policy that they shared, I thought this felt like a natural collaboration to bring our ScholComm librarian, Allison, in on too. I also wanted to include our science librarian, Sam, because her liaison departments were all the areas our Research Integrity Office said were likely to be affected by this new NIH policy: chemistry, physics, computer science, psychology, and marine biology. And indeed, as we found in our workshop discussion with the students, Sam's contextual knowledge of their disciplinary research areas proved extremely valuable. We were all particularly excited to be involved with the RCR trainings because it commonly is intended for a graduate student audience, which is an audience that UNCW Library has been wanting to improve engagement with.
Yeah, so as we kind of developed this training, actually, the Research Integrity Office's team did most of the logistical work for us, which is really, really nice of them. They were responsible for coordinating and scheduling all of these RCR trainings. They gave us a separate workshop slot for all of our topics during that training program. So we were able to cover data, scholarship, and scientific communication topics all together. We'll talk a little bit more about those in depth in a minute. All of these trainings were held virtually in Zoom on different days. And RCR also found the audience for these trainings. They contacted faculty who've received NSF grants, identified students who were involved in that research, scheduled trainings with those students, and it took a lot of the work of arranging sessions off of us and left us largely with just topics to cover and content to share. So we ended up covering quite a bit of content. If you could swap to the next slide. Including, and this is really the short list, each of these topics could have their own hour to engage students in. Actually, I am simultaneously teaching an Honors 191 Intro to Research course, and as we were discussing and planning for this, we ended up taking some of those conversations and transferring them into my Honors 191 course as kind of an aside, which was really, really helpful in piloting some of this. But we ended up covering kind of an overview of the role of the scientist in scholarship and in the conversations of scholarship, as well as responsible authorship, talking about confidentiality and security in peer review, and talking about ethical data collection, usage, and storage, which was a real consolidation of data topics to cover. I think, as you will see, Linny has quite a bit of content that she covered in this session. But really, we started with, if you can swap to the next slide, we started with a lot of the kind of conceptual showing why this matters. And as the science liaison, I felt like that was a good fit for me as sort of an overview. Why does this matter? What are the concepts we're trying to teach here? We discussed the frame of scholarship as conversation from the ACRL framework, likened it to a scholarly barbecue where everyone's brought something to the table to make it a party. Everyone's having a different conversation. It started before you arrived. It's going to go on long after you leave. This is one of my many attempts to modernize the Burkean parlor metaphor for scholarly conversation. But we also talked about the effects of science on society and on retraction, on the effects of retraction on the scholarly conversation, using real life examples from COVID-19 research, like the retraction of the paper that endorsed hydroxychloroquine. Asked some open-ended questions to the trainees about finding and joining these conversations. Where have they experienced them before, and where do they usually find more information? And talk to them about what their roles and responsibilities in the conversation might be as scientists themselves who are already contributing to it. I'll turn it over to Allison for her content.
Yeah, so the next thing we went over was some scholarly communications topics relating to the ethics of publishing. And that included examples of, for example, compromised peer review, papers that were retracted due to fabricated reviews and networks that were not actually real people. And from there, jumping into the scholarly publishing cycle and how that cycle is meant to, in its best ways, sort of reduce bias, but can also reproduce bias. So these 4 icons here for editor, reviewers, third-party services, and author are what I use to illustrate the cycle. So I went through sort of the life of a manuscript, and I annotated this as I was speaking, drawing lines between them as they went back and forth, and it ended up being quite a convoluted network at the end because, things go to the editor and then they go to reviewers, they go back to the editor, they go back to the author, and it just becomes a tangled web. And I think that was a good way to both talk through it and sort of create this illustration for people to visually represent how this process involves so many different people and so many people in this single sort of microcosm of the scholarly conversation between reviewers, the editors, and the authors of the work, and even the third-party services that might be copy editing it or formatting citations and things like that, because that is also meaningful work. So after I sort of talked about the scholarly publishing cycle and put that back to peer review and how the peer review process works, we talked a little bit about the double-blind peer review process and how that is meant to reduce bias but can sometimes reinforce it. I gave an example of when I was working at a publishing services company, someone in a double-blind peer review process suggested to the author to cite their own work because the author could not see who was making that suggestion. They thought that they could tell the author to cite their own work in in the article, and we had to deal with that in the company. So that's just one example that I gave. But then we went a little further into not just the anonymization of peer review, but the anonymization of manuscripts and how that works. So I oversaw an activity of another annotation activity, because Zoom is great for that kind of thing. You can get people to group annotate things. So it was a group annotation crossing out what we thought should be anonymized in just an example sample paper off the internet. So, you know, author affiliations, but also things further in the article, such as, you know, they mentioned that they previously published on a topic. And sometimes that's specific enough where you need to anonymize that sort of thing as well. And, you know, locations, not just of the researchers, but of where the work is being performed, things like that. So trying to get them to think deeply about why we do this and what the point is of it all in terms of these ethical publishing considerations.
Knowing the limitation on time, when we got to the data section of our conversation session, I had to think carefully about how to introduce concepts and make it as discussion oriented as possible per the NIH's requested format of training. I also needed to relate all the concepts closely to why they matter in terms of research misconduct, as this was the scope of RCR and not just a data training workshop about ethics or management or analysis or sharing. This first time around, I definitely didn't get to everything I wanted, but that's a good feedback for preparing for our second time teaching. I started out by getting some context from the students about what sort of data issues they were thinking about in their discipline. If I'm supposed to talk about ethical data use, first I want them to warm up by thinking of all the research workflow phases that would be important for an ethical data check. After that, I could share a few helpful tips for confidentiality and security. We showed them an example of a paper that got retracted or was questionable as a result of poor ethical data practice as an indicator of how this practice will also affect your research impact and your paper's accuracy, not just hurting participants or animals. This was the largest topic I spent time on, but to cover the other required areas, I provided a list of tools, software, and services we had at our university for data analysis and data management. I mentioned the NIH DMSP policy and showed a restricted data record in ICPSR for an example of different levels of data sharing and the documentation included besides the data.
So since we're presenting this again on Tuesday, this is particularly salient for us to think about the outcomes and lessons and what we learned from this sort of foray into providing this training. And one of the things was identifying it as an opportunity for functional outreach to students and to the IRB office. This created a lot of new connections to people doing work in these spaces on campus. We are able to, based on who is attending, you know, suggesting topics for more in-depth individualized consultation, working with other offices to provide student success opportunities in those ways. As we mentioned before, adjusting the timing of the 3 sections between data scholarship and communication. It's such a compressed time period of only 1 hour, but I think we've got some ideas on how we can narrow that down further and compress it, and maybe someday, hopefully we will have more time, using more appropriate examples to STEM students' research areas. We realized as we were going through this that a lot of the examples related to data ethics for human subjects did not apply to these particular students' fields. They were more working on animal use sort of things. So tailoring the examples that we have to potentially multiple different types of fields that might be attending, and then noticing the engagement patterns of attendees and how we can get them engaged earlier in. They warmed up when we started doing activities, but in the beginning when we were doing more of an overview, they were less sort of responsive. So just making the entire thing more interactive in that way. So then our considerations for future sessions, aka Tuesday, is expertise awareness of the people that are attending this. Some people have been working on this kind of stuff for a long time. Some people are new to it. So balancing the experience levels that we find in our training. Revising it to be primarily activity focused for increased engagement, perhaps a flipped classroom model if we can get that, because again, we have such a limited amount of time. The potential need in the future to address the ethics of AI and GPT-3 in future sessions, especially related to publishing and data. And the potential in the future to develop asynchronous materials to prevent information in a sort of module format that can be done at any time. That potentially would afford us more time to cover these very important topics. So thank you so much for listening to us. We're happy to answer any of your questions. Our contact information is available on the slide, but yes, thank you.
Okay, so
will stop
thank you for
sharing.
the wonderful presentation. There actually is one question directly to you guys. So we'll start there, and then I have a few questions of my own. So amazing presentations, all of you. Thank you so much for sharing this and inspiring the RDAP community. And we are going to head into a break now till 2 o'clock. Please join us back at 2 o'clock for the closing keynote by Amy Neeser, and look forward to seeing you there. Have a great rest of your RDAP conference.